Apparently a lot if you're the new King of England. Here's why King Charles III is already sparking some public concern over his behaviour as the monarch. It must be difficult to be a monarch.
A silence that shook the crown. There are moments in history when silence speaks louder than any royal proclamation moments, when a single decision changes not just a family, but an entire monarchy. King Charles III, a man who waited more than 7 decades to wear the crown, faced a choice no monarch is ever prepared for. A choice rooted not in power, but in pain. Not in tradition, but in truth. And when the decision was finally made, it left the world stunned. This is not just a story about a king, it is a story about duty versus emotion, legacy versus love, and a heartbreaking decision no one expected. Before we begin, if you value deep storytelling and emotional documentaries like this one, make sure to subscribe and stay with us for stories that go beyond the headlines. Chapter 1. A crown earned through waiting. King Charles was never meant to be an ordinary heir. From the moment he was born, the weight of destiny pressed gently but firmly upon his shoulders. While other children dreamed freely, his future was already written in ink older than centuries. For over 70 years, he waited. He watched his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, reign with unwavering strength. He watched the world change, wars end, cultures shift, empires fade, while his role remained frozen in anticipation. That kind of waiting does something to a person. It builds patience, yes, but it also builds quiet longing, a desire to finally lead, to finally make choices of one's own. And when that moment finally arrived, the crown did not bring freedom. It brought the hardest decision of his life. Chapter 2. The weight of a modern monarchy. By the time Charles became king, the monarchy was no longer protected by unquestioned loyalty. Every move was scrutinized, every silence analyzed, every word turned into a headline. The world no longer wanted perfection, it wanted humanity, and that was the paradox Charles faced. A crown built on tradition, ruling over a world that demanded change. Behind palace walls, advisors whispered caution. Outside, public pressure grew louder by the day. The king was expected to be strong, symbolic, unshakable, but inside, something far more fragile was unfolding. Chapter 3. A family divided by history. Royal families are often seen as united figures, standing together on palace balconies. But behind closed doors, they're families like any other, filled with love, misunderstandings, and deep emotional wounds. Charles had lived much of his life caught between roles: son, husband, father, and future king. Each role demanded something different from him, and often fulfilling one meant sacrificing another. Old family tensions never truly disappear. They linger. They resurface at the most unexpected moments. And for Charles, those moments arrived just as the crown settled upon his head. This was no longer about public image, it was about personal loss. Chapter 4. The decision no one saw coming. Power gives many things: authority, influence, legacy, but it does not protect the heart as pressure mounted. Charles was forced to confront a truth few monarchs ever admit. Not every tradition deserves to survive untouched. Some must be re-examined. Some must be let go. The decision he faced was not announced with trumpets. It was made quietly, painfully, and with full awareness of what it would cost. This was not a political move, it was a personal surrender. And when the decision finally surfaced, it felt like a crack in the very foundation of the crown. Chapter 5. Love versus legacy. Every monarch inherits more than jewels and titles. They inherit expectations carved by centuries of predecessors. To break from them is to risk history itself. Charles knew this better than anyone, yet love, whether for family, for peace, or for healing, can push even the most traditional ruler to the edge of change. The choice he made was not about winning public approval. In fact, it risked losing it, but sometimes leadership means choosing the harder path, even if it leaves scars. If this story resonates with you so far, subscribe now, because what comes next reveals the emotional core of the king's most painful decision. Chapter 6. When the palace doors closed. Inside the palace, The atmosphere changed almost overnight. Corridors that once echoed with ceremony now felt heavier, quieter, as if the walls themselves understood what had been lost. Those closest to King Charles noticed it first. The pauses in conversation, the longer moments of reflection, the way his eyes lingered just a second too long on portraits of the past. A king surrounded by history, yet deeply alone with the present. The decision had been made, but its consequences were only beginning to unfold. There was no applause behind closed doors, no sense of relief, only the quiet acceptance that something precious had been sacrificed for the sake of the crown, and sacrifices, once made, cannot be undone. Chapter 7. A nation reacts in silence and shock. When word reached the public, reactions came in waves. Some felt confusion, others felt sorrow. Many felt something harder to describe, a sense that the monarchy had crossed an invisible line for decades. The royal family had represented stability, predictability, continuity, but this decision disrupted that image, reminding the world that even kings are vulnerable to heartbreak. Supporters spoke of courage, critics spoke of betrayal, and in between were millions who simply watched, realizing that history was unfolding quietly before their eyes. This was not outrage-driven news. It was something far more unsettling: emotional truth. Chapter 8. The Price of Being Human. Behind every crown is a human being who must live with the choices they make after the headlines fade. For King Charles, the nights grew longer. The celebrations felt emptier. The crown, heavier than ever. There are decisions leaders make for power, and then there are decisions they make because they can no longer pretend they are untouched by pain. This was the latter. Charles had spent a lifetime preparing to rule. Yet nothing prepared him for the moment. He had to choose humanity over history, knowing the cost would follow him for the rest of his reign. Chapter 9. A Crown Redefined. Monarchies survive not because they never change, but because they eventually must. And in that moment, King Charles unknowingly began redefining what the crown meant in the modern age. Not distant, not untouchable, but deeply, unmistakably human. Some historians would later say this decision marked a turning point, not because of what was gained, but because of what was willingly given up. Legacy, after all, is not always built through expansion. Sometimes it is built through restraint. Chapter 10. The Loneliest Throne. Of all the thrones in the world, the British crown may be the loneliest, elevated above everyone, yet unable to step fully into personal freedom. King Charles sits upon it now, carrying a story no coronation can erase. A story of love, loss, and a decision that reshaped not just his reign, but his identity. History will judge him in many ways, but one truth remains undeniable: this was a decision made not by a symbol, but by a man. When history meets the heart, in the end, King Charles's heartbreaking decision reminds us of something powerful: that even the most ancient institutions are shaped by human emotion. Crowns glitter, palaces stand tall, but behind them are hearts that feel deeply, break quietly, and choose courage over comfort. Perhaps this is not a story about weakness. Perhaps it is a story about honesty. And long after the headlines fade, this decision will be remembered not for what it changed, but for what it revealed. If this story moved you, subscribe and stay with us, because history is not just written by power, it is written by the heart.